Oh hey, it's Wes, and today we're taking a look at, oh, that's not the right one, this one, the Viltrox 40 2.5 full frame for E-mount, on other mounts as well though. We already had a look at its little brother here, I guess it's littler, no, not much. The 56 1.7 for APS-C, but this is a full frame lens, and it is much more interesting than I expected. And first, we're going to talk about the build quality. Let's break this down just a little bit. As you can see, this is a very small, very lightweight lens. It is only a 2.5 aperture. We have a very small lens hood here. Look at that. Very tight and compact, but altogether, very nice, say if you're using it on a gimbal or travel or something. If we look around on the back here, we don't have a rubber gasket for weather sealing. We do have a USB-C port. No switches or buttons. We have a plasticky focus wheel. It feels fine in the hand, not perfect. And if you give it a squeeze, it kind of locks down a little bit. So yeah, this lens is obviously made for lightweight and also for a somewhat aggressive price point. We'll talk about that later. But very nice fit and finish. The whole line looks very nice, very simple, minimalist design. I like it. I'm gonna give that a 7 out of 10 for build quality. Handling and usability. Obviously, the biggest win for usability and handling here is the very small, compact size. On a full frame body, it's barely even there at all. But you have no buttons or switches, no AF/MF, I love having that, no aperture dial. I don't really care about aperture dials myself. You have the USB-C port for very easy firmware updates, just drag and drop. So much nicer than Sony's convoluted system. The focus ring feels great, it has about the right amount of damping, that's good. For the most part, the big win for usability is just how small and compact it is. But we are missing some bells and whistles. It's an 8.5 out of 10. Image quality. This is very sharp. It is more than usable, wide open at 2.5, which you would hope, because you don't want to have to stop it down much more than that for a lot of circumstances. But if you do stop it down further, it does get just a tiny bit sharper, as you can see. Chromatic aberration is very well controlled, which we would hope to see with a lens that doesn't start with a wide aperture in the first place. Stomping it down, it sharpens up just a little bit, and it stays quite sharp all the way through to f11. Flare resistance is good, but not great. Color rendition is very nice. Overall, I'm very pleased with the image quality of this lens. No problems with using it at any aperture for professional work. I give that an 8.5 out of 10 for image quality. Next up is where I was surprised. It is image character. This lens does not have the modern look and feel of most of their other lenses, such as the 56. This has a bit of a vintagey character to it. Your bokeh, a little bit soap bubbly. And it has like a little bit of unexpected 3D pop to the images, even though you don't have a very shallow depth of field. Sunstars they're there, they're not that impressive, nothing to write home about there. There are some fun rainbow flares at times. You might like that, you might not. My biggest problem though is that when you get towards the edges, instead of getting a cat's eye or a football or a swirl, it becomes more of a D shape, which isn't terribly attractive, which sometimes results in slightly nervous out of focus areas, but only sometimes. But thankfully, this is not the boring lens that I thought that it might be. It has a very nice look to it, especially since this lens is very much an ideal focal length and aperture and size and weight for street photography, which tends to have a bit of a retro vibe to it in the first place a lot of the time. That is very ideal here. This has kind of a retro character and an ideal shape and size for that kind of work. I'm going to give this an 8.25 for image character. Focus performance. This is very snappy, very quiet, not absolutely quiet. The narrower aperture does help because there's less glass to move around. But I was expecting this to do worse in low light than it does. The 56 struggled a little bit in really bad lighting situations, whereas this one did not. If we set the two to gather the same amount of light, like you set this at 2.5 and this one's already at 2.5, this one will just not have a good time while this one is still doing just fine. So I'm not sure why it's so much better that way. And this does a very good job of focusing pretty much to the edge of the frame, unlike a lot of third-party autofocus lenses do. The only real issue you have is that you are still limited by the 2.5 aperture. For a prime lens, you usually expect to be able to open up a little bit wider, get a little bit more light, and that does help for focusing. A cut and dry design constraint of this lens, it's not a failing of this lens. This is as good as a lot of first-party lenses, but not like full-on direct drive. So I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10 for focus performance. I am very impressed. Value. This is where things are going really well. This comes in at only $170 for a full-frame E-mount lens. If we compare this to other not quite wide aperture lenses in that range, there's the Tamron 35 2.8 for $250, a Rokinon 35 2.8, $250. There is a Yongnuo 35 2.0 for $280. Get more light, more money. Rokinon has the 45 1.8 full frame for $300 and a 35 1.8 for $350. And there are lenses with almost exactly the same characteristics as this. There is the Sony 40 2.5 for $600. Honestly, unless you need those focusing gears that are on that Sony, wow. Definitely buy this instead. This is a fantastic lens for far less than half the price, less than a third of the price. So this is an obvious 10 out of 10 for value, which propels this lens all the way up to an 86.3% for a total score. That is a fantastic score. Let's see how it checks out on our rankings. It is very high up there and only falls just barely short of the monster amazing lens from Viltrox, the 75 1.2, which is quite literally one of the finest lenses for Sony E-mount. If you have any questions about this fun, tiny little lens, let me know down in the comments below and I'll get back to you. If you want to pick one up, there are links in the description to help support this channel and feed my fat cats. So until next time, let's go take some photos.